Good evening.
Good evening. Thank
Uh,
you so much for being here. So, my name's Nama, and I'm the Wisconsin chapter leader for Save the Students.
I'm Meadow, and I'm on the programs team.
My name is Sean. I'm on the logistics team.
So it's just growing up and seeing what you do now, was that ever reflected in your childhood or anything you thought about, or did you want to be something completely different when you were a child? And if you did have different aspirations, how do you think that affects how you do your job today?
Maybe I'm too old to remember. I don't know. But I don't remember thinking much about what I wanted to do when I was a young person. Now, maybe I've forgotten. I know a lot of people say when I was 4 years old, I wanted to be a doctor, but I don't remember any of that, quite candidly. My first memory of what I kind of wanted to do was when I got to in high school. In high school, I took chemistry, and I had a very good chemistry teacher. Mr. Thomas was his name. And my father was also in the chemistry business. He got his degree from Iowa State University in chemical engineering. So those two factors sort of led me to think that I probably wanted to be a chemist, and I wanted to work for DuPont because DuPont was the big famous chemical company. That was my first memory probably of thinking about what I might want to do.
Yeah, great. And all that's really cool that it is completing your story today and seeing where you ended up and having completely different aspirations. Now, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job?
Right now with the virus, the last 10 months now, I've been working at home. So I think everything we say now, we have to sort of assume it's before that happened. Because right now, there's nothing rewarding about my job, except maybe talking to you folks today. My answer to your question would be very simple. It would be people. As Secretary of State, I've had the pleasure and the honor in some ways of traveling around the state and speaking to many organizations, many high schools, and meeting many wonderful people. So that's the most rewarding part of my job for the many years.
Yeah. And then kind of going off of that, of course, it's great to have a job that you enjoy and a lot of things you find in it, but there's bound to be those challenging parts as well. So what would you say is some difficult aspects of your job?
Well, the most challenging part is very simple. It's the Republican governors and the Republican legislature. That's the most challenging. That has made things they've done have made my job very unpleasant, trying to fight off the destruction of the Secretary of State's office. And I'm very sad now as I get older, and I'm going to be retiring probably sometime in the next few years, that the office has been destroyed while I was Secretary of State by the Republicans. And that's the truth. So there it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's definitely, starting with that, a good segue to the next question. That I think this will also be like a pre-COVID and then now during COVID question, just because I know that a lot of our lives have changed so much. But what would you say your job looks like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, before the governor took everything away, I had to manage an office and make sure everything worked. And bring in new technology and a lot of stuff that I like doing. And traveling around the state. I get invited to Rotary clubs and high schools, and I traveled a lot around the state. So that would be now, even before the virus, my job would be to go to the office, say hello to the 1.5 people that are there, see if anything needed to be dealt with, answer my email, and go for a walk. And then occasionally something would happen that I had to deal with, but not much, quite honestly.
Yeah. And then, so the 2020 election, it's come to an end now, but it definitely made history with the very tense political climate with not getting results on election day and just all these things. Has there been an election in your lifetime that you've noticed has been a lot like 2020's?
Well, there are two elections in my history not involving me, but involving presidents that I thought are important. The first one was the Carter election. When Carter ran for re-election, he was defeated by Ronald Reagan. And it was quite an election because it involved an oil crisis where there were long lines for gas, and they blamed Carter for that. And it was very important, in my opinion, for our country. Reagan ripped the solar collector off the White House that Carter had put on as a symbol of solar energy. He shut down all the solar energy centers around the country and the research. The second election that is very critical was the election of Gore versus Bush. There was Vice President Gore was running for election, and Bush was his opponent. And that was a very contested election. And like this election, it went into many, many days of argument. It was different, though, in many ways, because there's only one state involved, Florida, and it was only a few hundred votes. So the argument was maybe a better argument. The arguments Trump has been making have been nonsense. But in the Gore-Bush case, it was only about, I think, 300 or 400 votes in Florida. Well, it turned out that that election was stolen by Bush, the Republicans, and the Supreme Court. It all involved a ballot where you poked through the ballot with an instrument and made a hole. And then those ballots could be read by a scanner where the holes were. But sometimes when you pushed that through, the paper didn't go all the way off, and it was still hanging on the paper. And they called them hanging chads. So it all became about hanging chads. So for hours and hours, people went through hundreds of ballots looking for hanging chads and whether the ballots were really for Bush or really for Gore. And there were a lot of strange things. The ballot was laid out in a very complicated way that made it hard to know whether you were really voting for Bush or voting for Gore. Well, finally, the Bush people took the case to the court, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled, I can't remember now, 5-4 or something, that Bush had won the election. I think that was wrong, but that's what happened. And Vice President Gore decided not to challenge it. He said, okay, all right. And Bush became president. Again, if Gore would have been elected with his background and his interest in environmental issues, we'd have had a totally different country than we had when Bush became president.
All right. So with your years of experience, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people in the public have about our government?
I thought about that. I think it's very simple. They don't understand or think that the government affects them. So they are anti-government. Not everybody. The Republican Party for years has tried very hard to make people not like the government. And they've been successful. They've convinced about half the people in the country who vote for them that the government's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it seems like that's been sort of a dichotomy since the time of the New Deal.
Yep.
So another question that I have for you is, what do you do to work for the promotion of youth engagement within political issues?
Well, I used to visit schools. And I really enjoyed going to high schools and giving a talk and then answering questions. You found me and asked me to come do this. I'm glad. I enjoy that.
Yeah, I think that's really great for having leaders that are willing to do that sort of thing. So when you were doing those visits, what do you think were some of the most important things you talked about for that you thought young people needed to know about the way the government functions?
I think trying to explain to them how, in my opinion, the government is not functioning. Certainly our democracy is not functioning. And it's not functioning because the way the election system has been tampered with. So a combination of the propaganda and the skewing of elections.
With all those sorts of issues coming up, how do you think maybe the work you do or the work others could do could help connect young people and get them on board with, the sorts of issues that we have to face?
I don't know what I can do. Doing this with you folks today is one way. Visiting schools like I used to would be another way. I've tried putting out press releases, but I'll be honest, the media usually ignores them. They don't put them in the paper or put them on the television news. So I'm a little discouraged about what I can do at the moment. In the past, I've done a few things, like I started Clean Wisconsin. And for 3 years, I was on the Sierra Club board. And we worked as best we could to reach out to both minority groups and young people, to try to bring them into concerns about the environment.
That's great. I know there's a huge disconnect with the government and like the youth, and like it's very hard to bridge that right now with so much going on. But visiting schools, I think that's really great, and I hope I can see you in school one day once we go back. But hopefully. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and coming to talk to us and the youth of Wisconsin. So this brings us to our final question of the day, which is, why do you think students should take the time out of their busy schedules to learn about the government, more specifically the Wisconsin government?
Because it's their government and it's been hijacked, and the only way to get it back is to go to work. Because if we don't do something, the rich people and their friends, the Koch brothers, and what they want their taxes cut, and they want no regulation, so they can pollute and do whatever they want. And they've won. At the moment, they've won. If we're going to win, we got to fight and work to take back our government and elect men and women who are not beholden to the money and to that philosophy, but who believe that government is a positive thing in our lives, that is important to do good for people and good for the future. That's the kind of government I believe in, and the kind of government we have to work towards.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's what the youth want to do. They want to step up and bring power and change and like legislative change and community change and bring it up forefront. So that's great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and coming to talk to us. It's been great. And it's amazing how much work you've done and for our state. And we're really appreciative of everything you've done. So thank you so much.
Well, and thank you all for your interest and your time and what you're doing to try to shake things up a little bit. It's your country and your future. So you've got to make it what you want it to be.